Guys, how's it going? Day 3 from the Karlovy International Film Festival. Wanted to make a quick video. I've recorded 7 interviews here for Fred Film Radio today, so it's been a very fast day and I have to go now. I have to go to an event by the European Film Distribution. It's promoted by them. It's Future Frames. Fred Film Radio is a partner of the event that is promoting 10 young filmmakers from across Europe and showcasing their short films, and tomorrow I will be interviewing each one back to back, which is not easy for my mental sanity, and after that I'm going to have more interviews. Tonight I'm actually going to have another interview that I have to prepare for as well, but I wanted to kind of record a thought that I had today while I was doing my interviews, and in fact it's about 2 films in particular, because I just happened to have done these 2 interviews about these films that I'm about to talk about today back to back, and they're both talking about the same thing, and despite being from different parts of the world, completely different parts of the world, they look very alike even visually, but also they have the same problem, which I think is universal. The thing that they are talking about, I guess I should say before I reveal the film's names, is rural life and life in the countryside and the agricultural work, and how it's fading away, right? It's disappearing. People nowadays don't want to be in the countryside. They don't want to be. They don't want to cultivate the land. They don't want to raise cattle. They don't want to do works like that. They're more drawn to the city, where they hope to have better life and they have better facilities, and life is just thought of as easier there, you know. It's not necessarily the truth for everything, but it is certainly the truth for a lot of things, you know. There's lots of reasons why there's been a downfall in the of popularity in life in the countryside for the last few days, and for the last few years, decades in fact, and that doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon. But are we all the better for it? I don't think so, because mental health is on the rise. We're becoming more aware of it. That's partly one of the reasons why the statistics on mental health are on the rise. You know, up to not too long ago, we didn't think that depression, for example, was actually a real thing. It was a medical condition. It was a condition that needed to be taken care of. It was just ignored and shrugged off, and led to people just being generally unhealthy. But the 2 films that I'm talking about one is a Chinese film called the FADING Village. Feifang is the director of that film, and the second one is The Last Autumn, and it's an Icelandic documentary by Yrsa, Roca, Fannberg. And I interviewed both, and today, I happen to have interviewed them one after the other, so it was interesting because not only did they almost say the exact same things, although I must say that Liu Feifang was more wordy and his answers were much longer, because what do you expect from a guy who directed a 3-hour-long documentary feature, which I watched and I enjoyed. I don't mind that, you know. It was challenging, but sometimes you have to get through the hurdles to really see what is rewarding about works of art, and certainly cinema is no exception. But actually that leads me to my point. You know, the second one then, so they were both kind of answering the same things, and I almost felt inclined to ask the same questions, just to prove that what they said was almost the same. Both are from have a connection to the regions that they depict, and they're both rural areas of their countries, you know. But they're both sad, and they're both sorry to see these villages fade away. In the Chinese film, the village is only inhabited by elderly people who incidentally talk about dying a lot, but you know, it's expected. But in the Icelandic film, then there's almost no dialogue at all. Life seems to be more quiet there, and you know, it's the Nordic way. You know, from personal experience, the stereotypes are a little true. Some of them can't help but be true, and certainly the Nordic people are among the least talkative I've ever met. But that's the thing. It's like despite being in different geographical locations, the films were quite similar. The people and just everything about it, you know, the look of the places too was surprisingly similar. The situations were different, the forms were a little different, but overall there was a solemnity to these works. But why am I bringing up these points? Well, this series is not a film review, so I'm not going to review these films, but the thought is that there is a similarity between the rural lifestyle and filmed. If the rural lifestyle is on its decline, a decline that is almost definite. All these villages are fading away. Young people just don't want to stay behind and continue in the traditions even of their families, who might have been generations and generations of people who worked in agriculture. Despite that, they don't want to stay behind. So the similarity between the agricultural lifestyle and cinema is that cinema too has at least been pointed out as fading away too. I very often hear people talk about how cinema is dying, and I have opinions on that. I think that the fact that it's dying actually brings it closer to people. The definition of, because we're also dying, so if anything, the certainty with which some people point that out, to me, makes me think that cinema is perhaps the most human of all art forms, and we could talk about that on and on and on. But my point is that if the power of art is, as Nina Simone said, to reflect the times, then it makes perfect sense for an art form that has been said time and time again is fading, talks about things that are also fading. So there is a similarity between cinema and the rural lifestyle in that sense, because they're both fading. And the cinema, in documenting it, is also capturing a reflection of itself. This seems like a very deep thought, perhaps too out there, but in fact, that's the beauty of it. Cinema being let me rephrase it. Why, this is perhaps why people edit their YouTube videos, because, thoughts tend to go all over the place, and, but I'm all for imperfections. Why do we go to the cinema? Well, I believe that we go to the cinema to catch a reflection of ourselves that we can identify with. This aspect has been frowned upon, and we've all been made feel guilty by many of the grand theorists who thought that, we should feel guilty for seeing a reflection of ourselves in films because it encourages stereotypes and encourages disparity, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's okay to capture a glimpse of yourself if it's a side of yourself that you should be aware of and perhaps frown upon yourself and try to change it. That's the only way in which we can see it, And so, right, considering that we watch movies because we want that connection, that we want to see that reflection, whether we are aware of it or not, that reassures us or whether it frightens us or reassures us. That's sort of the goal of cinema's existence. That's sort of the goal of art's existence, But certainly with cinema, because it is so much more accessible and closer to the people, at least in several parts of the world, right? So, given that, then we can see that cinema itself is a very human art form, because by capturing things that are, whatever it is, it also inevitably, in some cases, captures a reflection of itself. So while the beauty of these documentaries is that they can solicit change, they can perhaps help raise dialogues and discussions about what a distancing from the connection of nature that the agricultural and rural lifestyle offered us, and that we're somehow forgetting, or that is somehow frowned upon in society. It's kind of seen as a lower tier profession or career for people to get into, while in fact I'm not of that opinion at all. It's capturing, so there's that dimension in these documentaries, but there's also just the sheer pleasure of documenting things, especially things that are fading away, because in case you haven't noticed, and I certainly have, things that fade away are far more interesting than things that aren't. They're, for example, in these documentaries that I've mentioned, the fact that some of the buildings and the houses are decaying, or even if they're well looked after, they're in a desolate area, it makes them more interesting. It gives them a character than perhaps they wouldn't have had if they had been if they hadn't been like that, if they had been beautiful and perfect in a touristy town, right. So these two aspects of the films are certainly there. But if you look beyond these two aspects, then you will notice that very often the best of films are the ones that reveal the human character of cinema by simply documenting things that reflect the state of the art form itself. And the reason why it makes it human is because it's by doing that, cinema reveals itself, regardless of their filmmakers and the aims of their filmmakers, as a deeply selfish art form. And I guess humanity is selfish. So, that was my thought. I hope I made sense, and I hope you people are, sort of able to follow what I'm saying. I try not to get too overtly difficult with these, but these are thoughts that I want to document, and that's sort of the idea of this series, which I remind you, it's not necessarily, at least, to review the films. It's simply to document thoughts that are inspired by them, by the films that I watch. So that's the idea behind this series. I hope you found it somewhat interesting. Bye bye.